The chandeliers glittered above the marble ballroom of the Whitmore Foundation's annual charity gala, their brilliance bouncing across mirrored walls and polished floors. Women in gowns worth small fortunes swept past with champagne flutes in hand, while tuxedoed men exchanged promises of future deals. The scent of roses and expensive perfume floated heavily through the air, mingling with the low hum of string instruments. To the guests, this was a night of spectacle and influence, where appearances mattered more than the causes supposedly being funded. Camille Johnson moved quietly through the crowd, carrying a silver tray with practiced ease. Her black dress, tailored to blend with the other staff, did not betray the elegance of her posture or the depth of her gaze. Every detail of the evening pressed itself into her mind: the arrogance in a man's laugh, the flash of jewels across a wrist, the subtle hierarchy that dictated who was acknowledged and who was invisible. At the far end of the room stood Eleanor Whitmore, the heiress to the family hosting the gala. Tall, blonde, and dressed in a gown stitched with crystals, she embodied entitlement in its purest form. With one glance, she seemed to claim ownership over the entire evening, expecting the world to bend around her desires. Her eyes, sharp as polished glass, landed on Camille when she passed by. "What are those?" Eleanor's voice cut through the music, her manicured finger pointing toward Camille's shoes. They were plain black flats, polished but modest, designed for comfort in long hours of standing. "Did you pick them out of a clearance bin?" Laughter trickled from a few nearby guests, uncertain whether to join or remain silent. Camille felt the heat of humiliation rise in her chest, but her expression remained steady. "They serve their purpose, ma'am," she replied softly, lowering the tray so another guest could take a drink. She chose her words with care, not out of submission but out of restraint. Eleanor smirked, sipping her champagne as though she had scored a clever victory. "Purpose," she repeated, savoring the word as though mocking its simplicity. "That's adorable. Some of us consider shoes an art, not a chore." Her friends tittered, eager to echo her disdain. For a moment, silence wrapped itself around Camille, heavy and suffocating. Yet within that silence was also a promise. She carried herself forward without stumbling, her steps graceful, her shoulders steady as if the insult could not bruise her spirit. But deep inside, beneath the calm exterior, Camille's heart stirred with memories of every moment she had been overlooked, doubted, or dismissed. This was not new. What mattered was how she chose to respond in the long game. The gala pressed on. Crystal glasses clinked, donations were pledged with grand gestures, and Eleanor floated from circle to circle, her laughter always a touch too sharp. Guests who had witnessed the exchange quickly looked away, unwilling to risk their own social standing by challenging her cruelty. Camille retreated to the corner of the ballroom, placing her tray on the service table. For a breath, she allowed herself the luxury of reflection. The irony was sharp. Here she was, dismissed as insignificant by people who had no idea that she was the founder and CEO of Aurelia, one of the fastest-growing luxury fashion houses in the United States. She had chosen to keep a low profile tonight, attending in disguise at the request of a trusted friend who worked with the Whitmores. It was a way to observe, to understand the circles that still clung to outdated notions of superiority. But Eleanor's cruelty had lit a spark she had not expected to feel so strongly. "Camille," whispered one of the real waitstaff, a young man named James who recognized her from a previous event. His voice carried both concern and respect. "You don't have to put up with that." She gave him a faint smile. "Sometimes silence says more than words, James. People reveal who they are when they think no one is watching." The night carried on, the music swelling as a new dance began. Camille straightened, smoothing her dress, and returned to her role. She knew the story was far from over. Every insult leaves a mark, but it also builds a path towards something greater. And before we dive deeper into this unforgettable story of arrogance, resilience, and poetic justice, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales that remind us how quickly the tables can turn. As the gala glittered on, Camille walked with quiet strength, knowing this was only the beginning. The ballroom glowed brighter as the evening unfolded, but beneath the shimmer lay an unspoken order of who mattered and who didn't. Waiters slipped quietly between clusters of guests, invisible until needed, while those in gowns and tailored tuxedos basked in recognition. Status hung in the air like perfume, clinging to those who believed themselves untouchable. Eleanor Whitmore thrived in that atmosphere. She was the kind of woman who entered a room expecting admiration, and when it wasn't offered freely, she demanded it with sharp words or dismissive glances. Her circle of friends laughed at her every remark, though not all with sincerity. Some smiled out of habit, others out of fear of exclusion. Still, no one challenged her, because in their world power was often measured by how loudly one could belittle another. Camille moved carefully among them, keeping her expression composed. She had been raised to believe dignity was a shield, and tonight it served her well. Yet she couldn't ignore the way people's eyes had flickered after Eleanor's cruel comment. Some had looked at her shoes with a hint of pity, others with smirks they didn't bother to hide. The sting wasn't just in Eleanor's words, but in the silent approval of those who chose not to intervene. Near the champagne fountain, Eleanor leaned close to a young man in a navy tuxedo, her laughter ringing out. "Honestly, the staff should be trained better," she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "It ruins the aesthetic when they don't look the part. This isn't some roadside diner, it's a Whitmore Gala." The man chuckled uncomfortably, his gaze darting toward Camille. She seemed polite enough. "Polite?" Eleanor arched a brow. "Darling, that's the bare minimum. If one can't afford to wear something decent on their feet, one should at least stay out of sight. People like that are background, not centerpiece." Camille heard every word. She let it settle inside her like a stone sinking in water, heavy but quiet. She knew this world too well, the subtle way society drew lines, reminding her of who was welcome in the spotlight and who was expected to serve in shadows. A guest in a silver gown approached her, offering a polite smile. "Could I have another glass?" she asked. Camille handed it to her, and the woman whispered almost apologetically, "Don't mind, Eleanor. She can be... hush." Camille returned the smile with measured grace. "I don't mind words as much as silence," she replied softly, leaving the woman thoughtful. The orchestra played on, filling the silence between conversations. To most, the night was a cascade of excess. Caviar, fine wine, endless chatter about stock markets and vacation homes in Aspen. But for Camille, every glance, every laugh, every whispered remark was a reminder of how thin the veil of civility could be. Eleanor moved again, drifting from group to group, dropping comments that belittled not just staff, but anyone she considered beneath her family's legacy. She mentioned a woman's outdated jewelry, mocked a man's accent, and even corrected another guest's pronunciation of a designer's name. Each time, laughter followed, shallow but present. Camille studied her with calm detachment. She had met people like Eleanor before, people who believed wealth was equivalent to worth. But experience had taught her something they didn't yet understand. Arrogance was fragile, and when it cracked, it shattered loudly. Still, she wondered how long she would have to stand in silence, bearing the weight of assumptions. She had built a company that challenged the very image of luxury Eleanor clung to, and yet here she was, treated as if invisible. The irony was sharp, but Camille held it close, knowing patience had its own power. The night edged forward, and with every passing moment, the divide between those who sparkled under chandeliers and those who moved unseen in their glow became clearer. Eleanor basked in her imagined superiority, while Camille carried herself with quiet resilience, an unspoken strength that no insult could erase. And somewhere in that glittering ballroom, fate was preparing to tip the balance, though neither woman yet knew how quickly the tables would turn. The night after the gala, Camille returned to her apartment in Brooklyn Heights, a place that carried both elegance and comfort. The wide windows overlooked the East River, and the hum of the city below was a sound she had grown to love. Unlike the glittering rooms of the Whitmores, her home reflected intention, not vanity. A shelf lined with books on design, history, and culture stood beside sketches pinned across a corkboard. On her coffee table rested fabric swatches, a notebook half filled with ideas and a single candle burning softly, spreading a lavender scent that grounded her after long days. She set her heels aside, real heels, not the staff shoes she had worn at the gala, and lowered herself onto the sofa. For a while she sat in silence, remembering Eleanor's voice, sharp and amused, slicing through her dignity. It wasn't the first time Camille had endured such remarks. She had walked through boardrooms where her presence was questioned, where assumptions about her background outweighed the quality of her vision. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maya, her closest friend and stylist. "Saw the pictures of last night. You okay?" Camille typed back, "Fine. Just another reminder of why I do what I do." Almost immediately, Maya replied, "Don't let it get under your skin. You're building something they'll never understand." Camille smiled faintly. It was true. Her journey had begun far from marble ballrooms. She had grown up in Atlanta, raised by a single mother who worked long hours as a nurse. Money had always been tight, but her mother taught her the value of resilience and self-respect. Camille had been the girl who sewed patches onto her own jeans, transforming them into something unique when others teased her for not affording new clothes. Creativity had become both shield and weapon. A scholarship to an Ivy League university had changed her path, giving her access to networks and opportunities that once seemed out of reach. But even there, she had felt the sting of being underestimated. Professors praised her designs, yet subtly questioned whether the luxury market was the right fit for her. Classmates with old money backgrounds dismissed her, never imagining she could one day become their competitor. She rose despite it all, founding Aurelia with just a handful of savings, a small workspace in a rented loft, and the fire of determination. At first, she had to beg boutiques in New York to carry her line. Many rejected her outright, saying her designs were too bold or not aligned with their clientele. Yet slowly, piece by piece, she built a following. Women who felt unseen by traditional luxury fashion found themselves reflected in her work. Her gowns spoke not only of beauty but of strength. Her shoes combined elegance with comfort, and her campaigns celebrated diversity that others ignored. Now Aurelia was whispered about in industry circles as the next great disruptor. And yet Camille still chose humility. She didn't crave the spotlight in the way Eleanor did. She preferred to let her designs speak first, her vision of redefining luxury as inclusive rather than exclusive guiding every decision. That night, as she sat with her thoughts, Camille whispered aloud, "It's not about proving her wrong. It's about proving myself right." The words carried weight, a reminder that her mission was larger than a single insult. Still, she couldn't deny the sting. She thought of the faces in that ballroom, the way people had looked at her shoes as though they defined her worth. It burned not because she needed their approval, but because their arrogance represented a barrier she had fought against her entire life. She rose from the couch, crossed to the corkboard, and pinned a new sketch she had drawn earlier that week. A pair of sleek shoes blending strength and beauty, designed for women who carried the weight of the world yet walked with dignity. She stared at the drawing, her resolve sharpening. The gala was behind her, but its echoes lingered, and Camille knew those echoes would soon meet her present in unexpected ways. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the Whitmore estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, illuminating rooms filled with portraits of ancestors who had once ruled high society. To outsiders, the mansion stood as a monument of wealth and permanence, yet inside, cracks had begun to show, though few beyond the family dared to acknowledge them. Eleanor Whitmore sat at the breakfast table, her silk robe draped carelessly over her shoulders. A half-empty cup of coffee sat untouched, growing cold as she scrolled through her phone. The gala had made the society pages, and though her picture was there, her laugh frozen mid-air, diamonds glinting under chandeliers, the accompanying article was less flattering. "Whitmore Heiress seen mocking staff member," the headline read in one corner of a digital column. Not bold, not scandalous enough to ignite outrage, but noticeable enough to spark whispers. Her father, Richard Whitmore, entered the room, his expression tight. The man had aged more in the last 2 years than the 10 before, his hair grayer, his voice more clipped. He sat across from her, opening the paper with a deliberate flick. "Eleanor," he began without lifting his eyes, "do you ever think before you speak?" She stiffened. I was joking. People expect me to be witty. That's part of what makes you reckless, he interrupted. Folding the paper, he leaned forward. Do you realize what's at stake? Whitmore Lux is bleeding. We're fighting to keep investors, to convince them this family isn't a relic of the past, and you're out there turning attention into mockery. Eleanor's jaw tightened. So it's my fault we're losing relevance? Richard sighed heavily. It's not just about relevance, it's about survival. If we can't secure funding this year, we may have to sell assets. Do you want to see this estate gone? Do you want your name to mean nothing? The word nothing stung more than she wanted to admit. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, forcing confidence into her voice. I won't let that happen. I can charm investors. People still want the Whitmore image, they always have. Charm won't save us now, Richard muttered. Innovation will, adaptability, but you wouldn't know about that because you've never had to fight for anything in your life. His eyes, sharp with frustration, lingered on her. Start acting like someone who carries responsibility, not just privilege. Silence stretched across the table, broken only by the clink of the spoon against porcelain. Eleanor looked away, her throat tight. She hated when he spoke to her like that, as though she were a child pretending to wear her mother's gowns. Her mother Lillian entered then, perfectly styled even in the morning, her pearls catching the light. Richard, don't scold her at breakfast, she said smoothly. We need to project unity, not division. Richard rose without another word, leaving his paper folded neatly behind. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the hall, heavy and deliberate. Eleanor exhaled shakily, her mask slipping for just a moment. She glanced at her mother, who studied her carefully. You shouldn't let him get to you, Lillian said, pouring herself tea. But he's right. Times are changing, and our family doesn't adapt well. You'll have to step into the spotlight with more purpose. People must believe you're capable of carrying the Whitmore name into the future. Eleanor set down her phone, suddenly weary. She had spent her entire life believing their fortune was untouchable, that luxury was their inheritance. Yet now, every gala felt less like celebration and more like performance, a desperate attempt to hold on to a crown that kept slipping. Alone in her thoughts, she whispered under her breath, I won't let us fall. The words were both promise and plea, but even as she spoke them, doubt coiled inside her, quiet and insistent. The Whitmore's world was changing, and Eleanor knew the cracks in their perfect facade would soon widen. She just didn't yet know how deep the fall could go. The week after the Whitmore Gala, Camille sat in her office at Aurelia's headquarters, a converted warehouse in Soho filled with light streaming through tall windows. The space reflected her vision, modern yet warm, where creativity hummed in every corner. Rolls of fabric leaned against walls, mannequins wore half-finished gowns, and the air carried the faint smell of leather and silk. Her assistant Jordan entered with a sleek envelope in hand. This just came in for you, hand-delivered. Camille arched a brow. Hand-delivered? That's unusual. Jordan placed it on her desk with a small smile. Beverly Hills address. Looks important. Camille opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the embossed lettering. It was an invitation to the International Fashion Investors Summit, a high-profile event where only the most influential designers and financiers gathered. The summit promised the chance to showcase collections, secure global investors, and cement reputations in the luxury world. She leaned back in her chair, the weight of the opportunity pressing on her. Aurelia had been growing steadily, but entering that summit meant stepping onto the global stage. It meant no longer staying quiet in the background, no longer observing arrogance from the sidelines. It meant claiming her place among the names that shaped the industry. Jordan studied her face. You're going, right? This is exactly what we've been working for. Camille hesitated. It's a chance, yes, but with visibility comes scrutiny. You know what kind of resistance I've faced already. Jordan's expression softened. And you've risen every time. Camille, people need to see you there. Investors need to hear your voice. And honestly, the industry needs your perspective. His words stirred something inside her. She thought again of Eleanor's smirk, of the way the ballroom had swallowed her silence. Maybe it was time to stop letting others define her worth. That evening, as she walked home, she passed boutiques along Fifth Avenue, their displays glowing under the city lights. She remembered how many times she had been told her designs were too daring for these windows, too bold to appeal to the traditional clientele. Yet she had proven them wrong. Piece by piece, Aurelia had carved out space. The invitation was proof that the world had started to notice. Back at her apartment, she called Maya. "You'll never guess what came today." Maya's voice was instantly alert. "Something good, I hope. The International Fashion Investors Summit, Beverly Hills. They want Aurelia there." A beat of silence, then an excited laugh. "Camille, this is huge. This is the moment you've been waiting for." Camille smiled despite her nerves. "It feels like it, but it also feels like walking into a lion's den. You know how those rooms can be. Old money, old ideas, all watching to see if I stumble." "Then don't stumble," Maya said firmly. "Walk in there the way you walked into every boutique that told you no. You've built something that speaks louder than their prejudice. Show them that." The conviction in Maya's voice steadied her. Still, Camille knew the risk. Stepping onto that stage meant facing not only industry scrutiny, but people like Eleanor, who would never see her as equal. Yet perhaps that was exactly why she needed to go. She hung up, setting the invitation on her desk. Its edges gleamed under the light, almost daring her to rise to the challenge. For a long moment she stared at it, her reflection faintly mirrored in the gold lettering. "Beverly Hills," she murmured, the words both daunting and promising. And though she didn't yet know it, fate was already weaving paths that would bring her face to face with Eleanor once more, under circumstances neither of them could predict. The Aurelia headquarters buzzed with energy in the days leading up to the summit. Sketches covered the tables, bolts of fabric leaned against walls, and the hum of sewing machines filled the air. Camille moved through the space with her notebook in hand, her eyes scanning every detail. This was no ordinary presentation. It was the moment Aurelia would show itself to the world. Her core team gathered around the central table. Marcus, head of design, adjusted his glasses as he spread out swatches of metallic silk. "We need a statement piece, something that says Aurelia is not following trends, but setting them." Sophia, the marketing director, countered, "But it also has to appeal to investors. They want innovation, yes, but they want profit first." "Bold can't mean unwearable." Maya, leaning against a mannequin, added, "It should feel powerful, clothes that make women walk into a room and command it." She looked at Camille, her voice softer. "Isn't that why you started this? To give women armor that feels like elegance?" Camille nodded slowly. "Exactly, it's not just fabric, it's identity. But we have to walk a fine line. Investors will look at me and see risk before they see vision. We can't give them an excuse to dismiss us." The weight of those words settled over the group. Marcus sighed. "It's frustrating. If anyone else had your track record, they'd already be courted by the biggest houses. Instead, we're still fighting to be heard." Camille offered him a steady look. "Which is why we don't fight with bitterness. We fight with brilliance. Let the work speak." Her conviction steadied them, but privately, doubts stirred. She knew how the industry viewed her, an outsider, a black woman daring to step into a world built by old European families and guarded by gatekeepers who preferred legacy over innovation. The summit would be filled with people ready to question her legitimacy. And yet, she also knew Aurelia had something none of them could replicate: authenticity born from struggle and vision born from resilience. Later that evening, she walked through the atelier, running her fingers across unfinished gowns. Each piece carried a fragment of her story, stitched not just with thread, but with memory. She paused at a design Marcus had been refining, a gown of deep midnight blue, structured yet fluid, modern yet timeless. It embodied the duality she wanted Aurelia to represent: strength and grace in harmony. Maya joined her, studying the gown. This could be the one," she said quietly. "Imagine walking into that summit with this as the centerpiece." "They won't forget it." Camille traced the hem with her hand. "If they don't forget it, they can't ignore us." The following day, the team rehearsed the presentation. Sophia clicked through slides showing Aurelia's rise, its commitment to inclusive luxury, and projections for global growth. We emphasize not just beauty, but sustainability. Investors want responsibility tied to profit, she explained. Camille listened, offering notes but allowing her team to lead. She had built Aurelia on collaboration, believing that leadership meant amplifying voices, not silencing them. Still, as she practiced her portion, her voice caught once. For a moment, she imagined the skeptical eyes of investors, the dismissive glances, the whispers questioning if she belonged. She steadied herself with a deep breath. "Again," Maya urged gently. "Say it like you're not asking permission. Say it like you already own the room." Camille repeated her words with new firmness, and when she finished, her team applauded, not out of courtesy, but because they felt the power of it. The summit loomed like a mountain ahead, daunting yet beckoning. And though Camille carried the weight of history and doubt on her shoulders, she also carried a truth sharper than any blade. She was ready. The Whitmore estate glowed under autumn sunlight, but the beauty of its manicured lawns and ivy-covered walls only masked the tension inside. Eleanor sat in the grand drawing room, her posture stiff as her father paced the Persian rug. Richard Whitmore was a man who carried the weight of generations on his shoulders, and with each passing year, that weight pressed heavier. "You don't seem to understand, Eleanor," he said, his voice low but firm. "This summit in Beverly Hills isn't another party. It's not about gowns and champagne, it's about survival. Whitmore Lux must secure investors or we're finished." Eleanor crossed her arms, her chin lifted defiantly. "I know what's at stake, Father. I'm not oblivious. But people still see the Whitmore name as a symbol. That means something." Richard stopped pacing, his glare sharp. "It used to mean something, now it's a relic. Investors aren't sentimental. They don't care about old family legacies. They care about profit. And right now Whitmore Lux is bleeding money. Do you think sentiment will pay our creditors?" Lillian Whitmore, seated elegantly near the fireplace, spoke with a voice calm but edged with steel. "Richard is right. We need this summit more than anyone. Our competitors are adapting, modernizing, and attracting younger audiences. Meanwhile, we've clung to tradition like it's a life raft. That raft is sinking." Eleanor's stomach twisted, though she masked it with a forced smile. "So I'm the one who has to fix everything. Me?" "You're the face of this family now," Richard said. "Investors will look to you, not me. My time in the spotlight has passed. You must convince them that Whitmore Lux still has relevance." The words struck her like a weight she didn't want to carry. For all her bravado, Eleanor knew she wasn't prepared. She had grown up with privilege, never needing to strategize or fight for opportunities. Now she was expected to embody competence and vision she wasn't sure she possessed. Her younger brother Thomas wandered in then, tossing his car keys on the table. "Still fighting about money," he muttered. "Maybe it's time to sell and enjoy what's left. No one's dying without Whitmore Lux scarves." "Thomas," Lillian snapped, her voice sharper than usual, "don't speak such nonsense." Richard's jaw tightened. "Your sister understands responsibility, even if you don't. She knows the name Whitmore must endure." Eleanor's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and pressure. She wanted her father's approval desperately, yet it always seemed out of reach. "I'll prove myself," she declared. "I'll make sure the investors believe in us." Richard studied her, his expression unreadable. "You'd better. Because if we fail, Eleanor, you'll be remembered as the Whitmore who let it all collapse." The room fell into silence after he left, his words lingering like smoke. Eleanor sank into a chair, her bravado fading once the door closed. Lillian reached for her hand. "You can do this," her mother whispered, though her tone carried more expectation than comfort. "We've raised you for this moment. Don't falter." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. She thought of the gala, of how easily she had controlled the room with a laugh and a cruel remark. But she knew deep down that mocking shoes and flaunting wealth were not strategies that would sway serious investors. She needed more than sharp words. She needed vision, and vision was the one thing she feared she lacked. That night, as she stood on the balcony overlooking the fading light, Eleanor clenched her fists. "I won't fail," she whispered to herself, the words sounding like both vow and warning. But in the quiet of her heart, doubt gnawed, relentless and unspoken. The Beverly Hills Hotel shimmered with understated opulence, its marble floors polished to a mirror sheen, its chandeliers casting golden light over the grand lobby. Guests in tailored suits and designer gowns drifted through the space with the confidence of those accustomed to influence. The International Fashion Investors Summit had officially begun, and the air pulsed with ambition. Camille stepped through the revolving doors, her team close behind. She wore a sleek black dress, simple, elegant, and intentionally understated. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her expression composed. She wanted her presence to whisper strength rather than shout for attention. As she crossed the lobby, she felt eyes on her, some curious, others dismissive. She had long grown used to such scrutiny. Marcus leaned toward her. "This is it. All eyes, all judgment, all opportunity." "Then let them look," Camille said quietly, her tone firm. On the opposite side of the lobby, Eleanor Whitmore descended the staircase with the practiced grace of someone raised in the spotlight. Her gown was dramatic, scarlet silk with a plunging neckline, and she moved as though the room existed for her alone. When her gaze landed on Camille, her lips curled into a smile that was not warm. "Well, well," Eleanor drawled as she approached. "I didn't expect to see you here. Did they mistake you for staff again?" Her voice dripped with feigned innocence, though her eyes gleamed with cruelty. Camille's posture remained steady, though her heart thudded. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied evenly. Eleanor tilted her head, her diamonds flashing. "In a borrowed dress, no doubt. One day you'll realize fashion is more than functionality. It's about power." She gestured at Camille's outfit dismissively. "Yours says practical." "Forgettable." Several nearby guests glanced toward them, their expressions flickering with discomfort. A few whispered, the sound of it sharp as glass. Maya, standing slightly behind Camille, clenched her jaw, but said nothing. It wasn't her place to defend. Camille didn't need rescuing. Camille met Eleanor's stare with quiet resolve. Clothing should empower the one wearing it, not the one mocking it. The words hung in the air, calm yet cutting. Eleanor's smile faltered, if only for a heartbeat, before she masked it with a laugh. "Oh, darling, you really do have a talent for amusing me." She turned to a man at her side. "Don't you think? Charming, really." The man chuckled weakly, clearly uncomfortable. Camille didn't press further. She had no need to win in Eleanor's arena. Instead, she turned toward her team. "Let's get ready for our presentation." Her voice was low but steady, her choice to walk away deliberate. As they moved down the hall, Marcus whispered, "You handled that with grace, but I swear one day she'll choke on her own arrogance." Camille allowed herself the smallest smile. "One day isn't today. We have bigger things to focus on." Behind them, Eleanor watched with narrowed eyes. The exchange hadn't gone as she expected. Instead of stumbling, Camille had walked away untouched, leaving Eleanor with an audience who had noticed more than she wanted them to. The day pressed on with panels and networking sessions. Investors clustered in groups analyzing presentations, trading opinions in hushed tones. The competition was fierce, each designer fighting for attention, each family brand desperate to prove longevity. Yet amid the crowd, the earlier clash lingered. Guests whispered of Eleanor's cruelty and Camille's composure, tiny ripples spreading outward. And though no one knew it yet, those ripples would soon become waves strong enough to alter the course of reputations. The grand ballroom of the summit transformed into a stage of competition. Rows of investors filled velvet chairs, their expressions sharp and calculating as they scanned the program booklet. Each brand had 30 minutes to present its vision, 30 minutes to convince those seated before them that they were worth millions of dollars in backing. The air vibrated with both ambition and fear. Eleanor sat near the front with her father and mother, her gown glittering under the chandeliers. When Whitmore Lux's name was announced, she rose with poise, her smile flawless. The presentation began with a video montage of the brand's history, decades of fashion shows, magazine covers, and celebrities dressed in Whitmore gowns. She took the podium, her voice polished but rehearsed. "Whitmore Lux is not just a brand," she declared. "It is an institution, a name synonymous with timeless elegance." We offer investors not only fashion but legacy. Slides shifted behind her, showcasing their iconic silhouettes. She emphasized tradition, heritage, and exclusivity, but as she spoke, whispers stirred in the crowd. A few investors exchanged looks. To some, it sounded less like a vision of the future and more like an echo of the past. Richard Whitmore clapped firmly when she finished, his applause loud, though the room's response was muted. A polite round of claps, little more. Eleanor's chest tightened, though she kept her face composed. Moments later, the announcer's voice rang out again. Next, Aurelia. Camille rose, her heart steady, though her pulse quickened. She walked to the stage in her midnight blue gown, every step purposeful. She began not with grandeur, but with authenticity. "When I created Aurelia," she said, her voice resonant, "I wanted to design clothes that empower the people who wear them. Fashion is not only about beauty, it is about identity, about giving someone the strength to step into the world as their truest self." The first slide appeared. Bold images of diverse women, executives, artists, doctors, teachers, wearing Aurelia designs in everyday life. The gowns shimmered not on runways but in boardrooms, art galleries, classrooms, even city streets. Camille continued, "Luxury should not mean exclusion. It should not silence individuality. At Aurelia, we merge craftsmanship with inclusivity. Our pieces are designed not just to be admired, but to be lived in." Investors leaned forward, intrigued. Unlike Eleanor, Camille didn't dwell on family name or legacy. She spoke of innovation, sustainability, and accessibility without sacrificing elegance. She introduced designs that fused classic techniques with modern silhouettes, shoes crafted with sustainable leather, gowns cut for both movement and comfort, accessories celebrating cultural artistry. Marcus presented a prototype shoe, its lines sleek and powerful. "This isn't just fashion," he said. "It's a philosophy. Style should elevate, not restrict." The investors murmured, impressed. One older man in the second row whispered, "This is what the market has been missing." Camille closed with quiet conviction. "Aurelia is not asking for a seat at the table. We are building a new table, one that welcomes everyone who believes fashion should be both beautiful and empowering. We invite you to join us." The silence that followed was thick, but then came applause, strong, genuine, building with momentum. Some investors even rose to their feet, clapping with admiration. Eleanor's stomach twisted as she watched. Her own presentation suddenly felt like a shadow compared to the light Camille had brought to the room. She forced a smile, but her knuckles tightened around the stem of her glass. Camille stepped off the stage, her team greeting her with quiet pride. She felt the warmth of victory flicker inside her, though she knew the summit was far from over. Still, one truth had become clear. Aurelia had spoken and people had listened. The summit's second day began with a restless buzz. Investors lingered in hallways, discussing Aurelia's presentation in excited tones. Words like fresh, visionary, and market-changing floated through the air. Camille noticed, though she carried herself with the same composed grace as always. Success felt close, but she knew better than to celebrate early. Across the ballroom, Eleanor watched with narrowed eyes. Her own presentation had landed with a thud, polite applause and little else. The glow of Camille's reception burned at her pride. Every whispered compliment for Aurelia was a dagger, every investor's nod toward Camille a reminder of her own faltering grasp. At breakfast, she leaned toward her father. "She's manipulating them with a sob story. That's all it is." Richard's frown deepened. "Don't underestimate her. Investors don't care about stories unless they believe in the product behind them. If she's winning them over, it's because she's offering something we're not." The words stung worse than the gala headline. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I won't let her humiliate us." That afternoon, subtle moves began. At a networking luncheon, Camille found her reserved seat missing from the table chart. A hostess apologized nervously. "It seems your place card was misplaced." Camille accepted with a polite nod, though inside she understood exactly what had happened. She chose another table, introducing herself to strangers instead. By the end of the meal, she had charmed them with her authenticity. leaving Eleanor glaring from across the room. Later, Camille overheard fragments of conversation in the lobby. A rumor had begun circulating that Aurelia's supply chain relied on questionable labor practices overseas. It was false, of course. Aurelia had built its reputation on ethical sourcing. Still, whispers spread quickly in such circles, dangerous and corrosive. Maya approached her, eyes blazing. "They're trying to poison the well. You know who's behind it." Camille exhaled slowly. "I know, but truth has a way of surfacing. If I chase every lie, I'll waste energy proving what I already know to be right." Marcus wasn't so calm. "But if investors believe this even for a moment, it could cost us everything. We need to push back hard." Camille placed a hand on his arm. "We push back with proof, not panic. Let the designs, let the transparency of our process speak louder than their whispers." Meanwhile, Eleanor met privately with a small group of investors, her tone conspiratorial. "Aurelia looks impressive now, but do you really think it can survive long-term? Small labels like that always burn out. They don't have the infrastructure, the history, the weight of a true house." She leaned closer, her smile sharp. "Whitmore Lux has weathered decades. Trust stability, not theatrics." Some investors nodded politely, but others looked unconvinced, their thoughts already drawn to Aurelia's refreshing energy. Eleanor's words rang hollow in comparison. Still, she pushed on, desperate to reclaim ground slipping beneath her feet. That evening, Camille stood on the balcony of her suite, the Los Angeles skyline stretching endlessly in neon and gold. Her team joined her one by one, the city's hum filling the silence. "They're afraid," Maya said softly. "That's why they're lashing out." "Yes," Camille agreed, her gaze steady. "But fear doesn't build empires. Vision does." Her words carried calm conviction, but inside a flicker of unease remained. She had faced obstacles before, yet this was different. Calculated sabotage, crafted to chip away at her credibility. She would need more than poise to withstand it. The summit was not finished, and Eleanor had no intention of conceding defeat. The final evening of the summit arrived, and the grand ballroom was draped in gold and silver, each table adorned with crystal glasses and polished cutlery. Investors mingled, their conversations a quiet hum of business deals in the making. The air was thick with expectation as the most anticipated part of the event was set to unfold, the official introductions of the brands to a wider audience. Eleanor sat at her table, her fingers tapping restlessly on the wine glass in front of her. Her nerves were barely concealed behind a forced smile, but she was ready for this. She had spent the past 2 days trying to regain some semblance of control, working the room, subtly undermining Camille's credibility, pushing the narrative that Aurelia's success was fleeting. But as the night progressed, Eleanor could feel the subtle shift in the room. Whispers about Aurelia's strength as a new disruptor filled the space. The investors she had spoken with earlier seemed more focused on Camille's future than her own. Eleanor's heart tightened. This was supposed to be her moment, the one where she secured Whitmore Lux's place among the fashion elite for decades to come. And then came Camille's name, called out by the announcer with the same gravity that accompanied the other major players. The spotlight swung toward her. Camille stood up, her posture tall and composed. As she made her way to the front, a ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. For the first time, Eleanor saw Camille not as a competitor in a borrowed dress, but as a force to be reckoned with. The audience parted as Camille took the stage. Her team stood by the side, their faces proud but careful. She didn't need grand words to capture attention. Her presence alone demanded respect. She stood before the crowd, her eyes scanning the room. "I'm Camille Johnson," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "And this is Aurelia. We are a company built on a single principle. Fashion should be for everyone, not just a select few. Our designs are for the woman who values elegance but demands function, for the person who carries her own weight without losing her sense of self. We believe in both beauty and inclusivity, and we strive to create pieces that serve not just as clothing, but as statements of strength." The audience listened intently, the shift in energy undeniable. Camille paused, allowing her words to sink in. She knew that this was her moment, not just to speak, but to solidify her place in the conversation that had been dominated by legacy brands like Whitmore Luxe. Behind her, a new slide appeared on the screen, featuring the signature pieces of Aurelia's collection: sleek coats, luxurious yet comfortable dresses, footwear that balanced fashion with practicality. The designs spoke for themselves. There was no need for extravagant promises, just proof that elegance could be accessible. As she continued, Camille spoke of sustainability, the importance of ethical sourcing, and the future of fashion. But what struck the investors most wasn't just her words. It was the conviction with which she spoke. Her belief in Aurelia was palpable. The room fell silent after her presentation, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was one filled with thought and admiration. The applause that followed was genuine, echoing louder than Camille had expected. Investors whispered to each other, nodding, some scribbling notes. A few looked at each other in surprise, impressed by what they had just witnessed. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she watched from her table, her hands clenched around the napkin in her lap. Her mind raced, but no matter how hard she tried to control her emotions, she couldn't deny the truth. Camille had captivated the room. The spotlight shifted from Camille to the investors, who were now turning their attention toward her. The evening had evolved into something entirely different from what Eleanor had anticipated. For the first time, she realized that this summit wasn't just about proving a point. It was about proving that a new era of fashion was being ushered in. And Aurelia was at the helm of that change. As Camille descended from the stage, she was greeted by her team. Maya was already waiting with a proud smile. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with admiration. But Camille's eyes were focused ahead, scanning the faces in the crowd. She wasn't finished yet, and neither was the competition. The ballroom, still humming with applause from Camille's presentation, began to shift in tone. Investors who had entered the summit with fixed loyalties now found themselves re-evaluating. Conversations sparked like sudden fires at the tables, quiet murmurs building into animated discussions. Aurelia's name spread from mouth to mouth, and with it, Camille's. She walked back to her table, her team rising to greet her. Marcus leaned in, whispering, "They're talking about you everywhere. You've turned the tide." Camille allowed herself a faint smile but kept her composure. "It's a beginning, nothing more. Let's see how it holds." Not far away, Eleanor's glass trembled slightly in her hand. She forced her lips into a smile, though her eyes betrayed fury. Her mother leaned closer. "You must speak with them. Don't let her steal every conversation. Investors are fickle. They follow whoever shines brightest in the moment. Remind them of our legacy." Eleanor nodded stiffly, rising from her chair. She approached a group of investors already discussing Aurelia. "Impressive, isn't it?" she said, her voice honeyed but sharp at the edges. "But let's not forget that trends come and go. Whitmore Luxe has stood for nearly a century. Stability is rare in fashion, rare and valuable." One investor, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, replied evenly, "Stability is admirable, but innovation is what drives markets forward. Aurelia seems to understand both." The subtle dismissal stung. Eleanor masked it with a laugh, but her chest tightened. Across the room, Camille was approached by the same investor. She extended a hand. "Camille Johnson, I'm Dana Carlyle. I represent an investment group based in London. Your presentation was extraordinary. We've been searching for a brand that understands not just the market, but the people who live in it." Camille shook her hand firmly. "Thank you. Aurelia was built for that very reason, to reflect real lives, not just the runway." More investors gathered, some asking questions about Aurelia's growth strategy, others curious about its approach to sustainability. Camille answered each with clarity, her confidence rooted in years of perseverance. She didn't oversell, nor did she beg for approval. She spoke as if she already belonged in the conversation. From the corner, Eleanor watched in frustration as alliances shifted before her eyes. Investors who had once been polite to her family now leaned toward Camille with genuine interest. She felt the ground slipping beneath her heels. Later, during the cocktail hour, Eleanor made one last attempt. She approached Camille directly, her smile tight. "You certainly know how to capture a crowd," she said, her tone deceptively cordial. Camille turned to face her, calm and steady. Respect isn't captured, it's earned. The words struck Eleanor like a blade, though Camille delivered them without malice. Guests nearby caught the exchange, their eyes flicking between the two women. Eleanor forced a laugh, desperate to maintain her mask. "Oh, you do have a sharp tongue after all. I suppose that's part of your charm." Camille didn't answer. She simply held her gaze, a silence that carried more weight than words. By the end of the evening, the shift was undeniable. Investors who had once courted Whitmore Lux now gravitated toward Aurelia. Conversations ended with handshakes, exchanged cards, and promises to meet again. Camille returned to her suite that night with her team, exhaustion tugging at her body, but satisfaction warming her chest. She had not only withstood sabotage, but had turned the whispers into applause. Yet even in triumph she remained cautious. Nothing was secure until deals were signed. Meanwhile, in her own suite, Eleanor stared at her reflection in the mirror, her jaw clenched. The heiress who once mocked a pair of shoes now faced the reality of losing everything to the woman she had dismissed as invisible, and that realization cut deeper than any insult ever could. The summit ended with a flurry of handshakes, exchanged cards, and promises sealed over champagne. By the next morning, the press had already chosen its narrative. Headlines glowed with Camille's name: "Aurelia steals the spotlight at Beverly Hills Summit," and "New face of luxury, Camille Johnson redefines elegance." Photographs captured her on stage, poised and confident, her midnight blue gown becoming iconic overnight. Meanwhile, the Whitmore name appeared in the same articles, but not as triumph. "Legacy House struggles to impress investors," one read. Another was harsher: "Whitmore Lux, out of touch?" Eleanor scrolled through the coverage with trembling hands, her stomach sinking with each word. At breakfast, Richard slammed the paper onto the table. "Do you see this?" His voice thundered through the dining room. "We've become a footnote in our own industry. While you were busy mocking others, Aurelia was building the future." Eleanor flushed, anger and shame clashing inside her. "Don't put this all on me. Investors should value stability, our name, our heritage." Richard's eyes were cold. "Heritage means nothing if no one believes in the present. You failed to adapt, and now we all pay the price." Lillian tried to smooth the tension, her pearls catching the light as she said gently, "There's still time. We can repair our image." "Eleanor, perhaps a public apology, a gesture of humility." "Humility?" Eleanor snapped. "Do you want me to grovel?" To admit defeat to her, Richard rose from his chair, his disappointment heavy in his gaze. Better humility than irrelevance. With that, he left the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing like a verdict. Eleanor sat in silence, her mother's eyes on her. For the first time, the heiress felt cornered, stripped of the untouchable shield she had always worn. The idea of apologizing burned her pride, yet the fear of losing everything gnawed deeper. Meanwhile, across Los Angeles, Camille and her team gathered in their suite, exhaustion mixing with exhilaration. Sophia spread newspapers across the table, grinning. "Look at this coverage. Investors are already calling for meetings. We've crossed a threshold, Camille." Aurelia is no longer an outsider. Marcus raised his coffee mug in a toast to proving them wrong. Camille lifted her glass of water, her smile calm. "Not to proving them wrong, to proving us right." Maya leaned closer, studying her expression. "You're quiet. This should feel like victory." "It does," Camille admitted. "But success carries its own weight. More eyes mean more scrutiny. More deals mean harder choices. We have to stay true to why Aurelia exists, or we'll become just another brand chasing profit." Her words sobered the room. The triumph was real, but so was the responsibility. Camille knew the higher she climbed, the more people would look for cracks. That evening, as the city lights shimmered outside her window, Camille reflected on the journey. The insults at the gala, the whispers of sabotage, the way investors' eyes had shifted from skepticism to respect, it all felt like a turning point. Yet part of her wondered if she could hold on to her authenticity while navigating a world built on arrogance and power. Back in Connecticut, Eleanor stood alone in her room, scrolling once more through the headlines. Each article that praised Camille felt like salt on an open wound. She whispered to her reflection in the mirror, "She humiliated me." Her voice trembled, not just with anger, but with fear. For the first time, Eleanor faced a world where her last name wasn't enough to protect her, and that realization left her shaken, standing in the shadows of a future she no longer controlled. The week after the summit, Aurelia's phone rang off the hook. Investors from across the globe reached out, eager to meet, sign deals, and discuss future collaborations. The press continued to sing Camille's praises, calling her the future of fashion and a disruptor to watch. For the first time in years, Camille allowed herself to savor the taste of success, even as the weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. At Aurelia's headquarters in Soho, the atmosphere was electric. Team members worked overtime, preparing for the next phase of expansion. Orders poured in and the showroom was abuzz with new designs. Yet, even amidst the flurry of activity, Camille took a moment each day to sit quietly in her office, reflecting on how far she had come. One afternoon, Sophia walked in with a stack of papers, her face glowing with excitement. "Camille, we've got a meeting with London investors next week. They want a piece of Aurelia. This could be the big break we've been waiting for." Camille stood and walked over to the window, looking out over the city. "It's incredible," she said softly. "But it's not just about the money. We've built something real here, something that means more than just profit." Sophia hesitated, understanding the weight in Camille's voice. "You're right. It's about more than just the brand. But the growth is undeniable. We're not just a flash in the pan. We're changing the way people think about luxury." Camille nodded. "And we have to make sure we keep our values intact. We can't lose sight of why we started." As the days passed, Camille's confidence grew. She had earned the respect of an industry that had once dismissed her. The whispers of doubt, the subtle jabs, the cruel mockery, they all seemed distant now. She had faced them all and emerged stronger. But the most important lesson was the realization that true success wasn't just about gaining recognition. It was about staying true to herself and her vision. That evening, as Camille prepared to leave the office, Maya joined her in the hallway. "You're doing it," Maya said, her voice filled with admiration. "You're changing everything." "You know that, right?" Camille smiled, the exhaustion finally catching up with her. "I couldn't have done it without you all. This is as much your victory as it is mine." Maya chuckled. "We've all been along for the ride, but you, Camille, you're the one who's leading us into the future. Don't forget that." As Camille stepped out into the crisp night air, she took a deep breath, savoring the moment. The city stretched before her, a reflection of the endless possibilities ahead. She had fought for this, against every expectation, every stereotype, every setback. And now, her brand was more than just a label. It was a movement. Yet, despite the triumph, Camille knew there would always be more battles to fight. The industry was unforgiving, and new challenges would arise. But she was ready. In the back of her mind, she thought of Eleanor. It wasn't about rivalry anymore. It was about proving that anyone, regardless of background or history, could rise to the top if they believed in themselves. And for Camille, that belief was everything. Weeks after the summit, the ripple effects had settled into clear outcomes. Aurelia had secured major partnerships with international investors, opening the door to expansion in Europe and Asia. Industry magazines praised Camille as a visionary leader, a woman redefining the meaning of luxury. For the first time in her career, she felt not just tolerated but celebrated in circles that had once shut her out. Yet even in triumph, she remained grounded. On a quiet Sunday morning, she called her mother in Atlanta. "We did it, Mama," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. Her mother's warm laughter filled the line. "I always knew you would. You were sewing beauty out of scraps before you could even reach the sewing table. I told everyone, my girl's going to change the world. And now look at you." Tears prickled Camille's eyes. "I wish you could have been there to see it all." "I didn't have to be," her mother replied. "I raised you to stand tall, and you did. That's all a mother could ask." The call ended with love, and Camille sat in her apartment, gazing out at the skyline. She thought of her journey, the laughter at her expense, the doubts whispered behind closed doors, the arrogance she had faced. Each moment had sharpened her resolve, and now every step she took carried the weight of that victory. Across the country, Eleanor lived a different reality. Whitmore Lux had lost key investors, and the family was forced to sell assets to keep the company afloat. The press that once adored her now painted her as a cautionary tale, the heiress who had failed to evolve. In the solitude of her room, Eleanor replayed her encounters with Camille. The memory of mocking her shoes at the gala stung like an open wound. She whispered to her reflection, "I underestimated her." The admission was bitter, but it was real. For the first time, she faced the truth that arrogance had blinded her to resilience. Meanwhile, Camille prepared for Aurelia's next show. Her designs now carried not only fabric and form, but a message: elegance rooted in inclusivity, power stitched into every seam. She stood backstage during rehearsals, watching models walk with strength in her creations, and she felt pride swell in her chest. This wasn't just about fashion, it was about rewriting the story of who belonged in the world of luxury. Maya joined her, smiling softly. "Look at what you've built. This isn't the end, Camille, it's the beginning." Camille nodded, her eyes never leaving the runway. "We've proved we deserve a place at the table. Now we'll build a bigger one, so no one's left standing in the shadows." Her words carried conviction but also compassion. She didn't want revenge, only progress. And in that difference lay her true strength. As Aurelia's future unfolded, Camille carried her triumph not as a crown but as a torch, lighting the way for those who would come after her. And just as the story closes on this chapter of resilience and justice, remember, success is not only about silencing doubt, but about staying true to yourself when the world demands you shrink. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales of justice, resilience, and triumph. And don't miss the next story waiting for you right here on screen, because every ending is just the start of another journey.